Okay, let's get started. Welcome to the webinar, everybody. This is Mark McHenry along with Doug Grubbs, and today we're going to talk about the new ProStar Gen3 controller that officially launched earlier this month. It's important to note that the Gen3 controller is an upgrade and it's replacing the ProStar Gen2 PWM, but the SKUs will remain the same. Also, this ProStar Gen3 is a completely different controller than the ProStar MPDT controller that we launched just over a year ago. Our new ProStar Gen3 PWM controller is about half the size of our ProStar MPDT, but it does look very similar. So just want to make sure there's no confusion about that. And on this slide you can see the metered and non-metered versions of the ProStar Gen3 PWM controller. And in between you can see the agenda for today's webinar. So I'm going to start off with a brief company overview and then compare the new ProStar Gen3 to the ProStar Gen2 that the Gen3 is replacing. We'll take a look at the accessories and applications associated with this new ProStar model, and then we'll end with a summary. I figure the presentation will run for about 20 or 30 minutes, and then we'll address your questions at the end, those questions that you type into us through the GoToWebinar chat box. Lastly, I must mention that a recorded version of this webinar will also be made available to you. Let me share some quick facts about Morningstar for those that might be new to the industry. Morningstar has been a leading supplier of solar charge controllers and inverters for over 20 years. We've had the same ownership, same management, distribution channels, and business strategy since our inception. We've supplied over 350,000 ProStars and over 3 million total solar charge controllers and inverters through over 200 authorized distributors in over 100 countries. Our products have been used in a variety of applications, including residential, boating and RV, and industrial applications such as telecommunications, oil and gas, lighting, traffic, railroad, and surveillance monitoring. On this slide you can see the Morningstar products and accessories. We have 4 MPDT controllers on the top row, and on the bottom row you see our SureSign inverter and a group of accessories to all the products that you see on the slide. The new ProStar Gen3 controller right here, second on the middle row. This complements our existing line of PWM controllers. And as I mentioned earlier, this third generation ProStar PWM controller is replacing the ProStar Gen2 that you see right here. This is a rolling change, so as the Gen2 inventory is depleted, we will ship the Gen3 to customers. This diagram here shows how the ProStar Gen3 fits into an off-grid system. So what's happening here is sunlight contacts the solar array, which then converts the solar power into DC electrical power that it's going to go ahead and deliver to the charge controller. Charge controller regulates the amperage and voltage that is delivered to the loads, and any excess power is then going to be delivered to the battery system. This is so the batteries maintain their state of charge without getting overcharged. And then during the evening when there's no sunlight, the battery power is used to run the load. And on the next slide we're going to show the ProStar Gen2 so you can appreciate that it has the same footprint as the Gen3. You see here that the ProStar Gen2 has the same screw hole locations, and the solar, battery, and load connections are virtually identical. Let me go back to the Gen3 again. And in this diagram, the Gen3's terminal cover is off, so you can see the terminals. If you added the replaceable terminal cover, the terminal cover extends about a 1/4 inch below the controller to protect the terminals. But otherwise, the width, height, and depth of the ProStar Gen 3 is identical to the Gen 2. And although the dimensions of the controller are the same, the shipping box for the Gen 3 is slightly larger due to some packaging changes that were made. And on the next slides, we're going to go ahead and take a look at some tables that indicate what remains the same and what has changed between the Gen 2 and Gen 3. The table that you're looking at here shows what has remained the same between the second generation and third generation ProStar. So both charge 12 or 24 volt battery systems, and both offer 15 or 30 amp battery charging versions. Max VOC is still 60 volts. It's recommended that you use 36 cell modules for 12 volt systems and 72 cell modules for 24 volt systems. 60 cell modules are not recommended because this is a PWM controller that operates at battery voltage. And you see here the operating temperature on the Gen 3 is still -40 to +60 Celsius. So it works in very cold Arctic temperatures as well as very hot desert climates. The Gen 3 has the same footprint as the Gen 2. So if you have to replace a Gen 2, the width, height, and depth, as I mentioned before, are the same, and the screw holes line up exactly the same. And as is common with all Morningstar controllers, the ProStar Gen 3 doesn't have any fans or moving parts. It's 100% solid state. Gen 3 comes in metered and unmetered versions, but the meter on the Gen 3 is a huge upgrade, and not just in terms of aesthetics. And I'll cover that a little more in some upcoming slides. And then lastly, you see both the Gen 2 and Gen 3 have a 5-year warranty. The next couple of slides I'm going to show list the differences between the new ProStar Gen 3 versus the ProStar Gen 2. So here you can see the differences. I thought it would be good to create this chart as a quick reference guide, and I also created slides to address many of these differences in more detail. Unlike the Gen 2, the ProStar Gen 3 has an RJ11 MeterBus port, enabling data logging, and you can connect the Gen 3 to a computer or the internet. The Gen 3 has programmable lighting control, has 7 standard charge settings plus a custom setting versus just 3 standard charge settings for the Gen 2. You can make firmware updates by computer in the field with the Gen 3. And the Gen 3 has an external remote temperature sensor terminal on the controller face. And then lastly, the load is adjustable on the Gen 3. And here are some additional differences between the ProStar Gen 3 and Gen 2. So the Gen 3 has a protective terminal cover. PWM noise can be easily eliminated by pushing a dip switch on the Gen 3. And the Gen 3 has enhanced self-test and diagnostics. It's compliant with IEC 62109 and has increased load surge capacity. And finally, the Gen 3's metered versions feature a larger, much more advanced meter interface. So let's take a look at the RJ11 MeterBus port. This allows connection to Morningstar's remote meter, the RM1, and also to Morningstar's relay driver, the RD1. If you have an unmetered version of the ProStar Gen 3, you can use a remote meter with it. This wasn't possible with the Gen 2. And additionally, the RJ11 MeterBus port can be used for open standard MODBUS communications protocol for control and remote data access. The Gen 2 doesn't have this capability. And this data port can be connected to Morningstar's RS-232, USB, or Ethernet MeterBus adapters, so you can connect to a computer locally or remotely. And this allows for custom programming and visibility of array voltage, battery voltage, current to loads and batteries, as well as faults and alerts. Think of a time you're away from your off-grid site and you wanted to to be there to know what's going on or to change controller settings. Now you have that ability to do this remotely. And also coming soon to the Gen 3, it can be used with the EMC1's cloud web service that will be launching later this year. And lastly, you can update firmware with the Gen 3, but you're not able to do this with the Gen 2. So we mentioned data logging a little bit earlier, and here's an example of the data logging that the meter displays. We're looking at the daily log range of minimum and maximum battery voltages here. So you can see what these values are today, also yesterday, and many days before that, if you just simply scroll back and forth. And you can see a history of up to 256 days of data logged values. If you have a non-metered ProStar Gen 3, you can connect to a computer to see these values, or you could download these values to a spreadsheet. In addition to minimum and maximum battery voltages, you can also see load consumption data. And unlike the ProStar Gen 2, the Gen 3 has PV-based lighting control. You can use a dusk till dawn setting, or you can program custom lighting settings like what you see here, where the lighting control goes on at dusk and then turns off at solar midnight. So it goes on at dusk and off at solar midnight. And you can program in multiple on-off settings. If, for example, the bus stop you see here, if this is a little different and maybe you wanted to turn the lights on from dusk until midnight and then off when the buses aren't running, and then on again a couple of hours before dawn when the buses start running again, and then off an hour after dawn when there's plenty of daylight. So you can create multiple settings. And you can use the buttons on the meter to make all these custom lighting changes, or you can connect a computer and make changes to the settings with a computer. Here you see the 3 standard charge settings on the ProStar Gen 2 and the 7 standard charge settings, plus a custom setting on the Gen 3. So with the Gen 2, you don't have any custom settings. You can only change the 3 standard charge settings. It's here. And there's one for gel, one for sealed, and one for flooded. And you make this adjustment by just turning that with a screwdriver by turning to the 1, 2, or 3 here. And then with the Gen 3, or excuse me, we're going to see Gen 3, I'm sorry, this is where you have the 7, so you have additional standard charge settings plus the custom setting. So there's 3 ways you can adjust the battery charging settings on the Gen 3. You can use dip switches, or you could use the scroll buttons on the meter, or lastly, you can change settings via computer if you connect the controller to a computer. So let's take a look at the dip switch option first. So I'm going to advance to the next slide. So for the dip switches, you need a pencil, toothpick, or small flathead screwdriver. The dip switches are small and easy to move, so you don't need to press very hard. And as you can see in the chart, which is taken from our operation manual, see the 7 factory presets. I'll give you more charging precision to match the charging needs of your batteries according to what your battery manufacturer recommends. So for example, rather than having just one setting for sealed batteries, as with the ProStar Gen 2, this ProStar Gen 3 has 3 settings for sealed batteries. Suppose you have sealed batteries and your battery manufacturer recommends absorption charging at 14.3 volts for 150 minutes and an equalized stage of 14.6 volts every 28 days. then you'd use this setting right here, which the dip switch settings 4, 5, and 6 would be in the off, on, off position. And if you wanted to completely customize your charge settings to something other than what's shown on this chart, you would set your dip switches 4, 5, and 6 to the on, on position. And with this custom setting choice, you then use the controller's meter interface to input the exact custom settings that you want. Or if you have a non-meter version of the Gen 3, you would connect it to a computer to input the custom charge settings. If you have a metered version of the ProStar Gen 3, you are able to adjust the custom settings with the meter interface. So after choosing the charging option on the meter, you would select absorption and then edit and save the voltage setting. And likewise, to set the low voltage disconnect, you would select LVD, edit and save. And if you had a non-metered version of the ProStar Gen 3, but you wanted to program custom settings, you could do so via computer after connecting a computer to the Gen 3. Now, we spoke about Morningstar's remote temperature sensor a little earlier. In order to attach a remote temperature sensor in the ProStar Gen 2, you had to unscrew the cover case and solder the RTS in place, whereas the Gen 3 has a RTS terminal, or remote temperature sensor terminal. So it's very easy to connect a remote temperature sensor. And this is advisable if there's a 5-degree difference in temperature between the battery and the controller. So granted, it was simple enough for a lot of people to solder and a remote temperature sensor in place on the Gen 2, but if you're out in the field without a soldering iron, this wasn't so easy. So we made this update on this Gen 3 controller. The ProStar has often been used in telecom, boating, and RV caravan applications. In some cases, PWM noise can cause radio interference. So if the PWM noise is a problem and you can't eliminate it by other means, you can use the slow telecom mode on the Gen 3 to eliminate the noise. This is done by simply pushing dip switch 8 up to the on position. And with the Gen 2, on the other hand, you have to unscrew the cover case and cut the telecom noise jumper on the circuit board. So this is a lot easier with the Gen 3. Unlike the Gen 2, the Gen 3 has a removable terminal cover. You don't even need any tools, so all you have to do is pinch the tabs here, take the cover off, and then you have access to the terminals, data port, and the dip switches. We received a number of requests to make this change, so we did it. This terminal cover provides greater safety protection, and it's required by some inspectors and some projects. What you're looking at here is the back of the Gen 3 terminal cover. And this has a quick reference guide concerning your dip switch settings. A more in-depth guide to dip switch settings is located in the operation manual, but this short guide can come in handy when you're out in the field and you just need a quick reference about load control, system battery voltage, and current switching settings. Another cool feature of the ProStar Gen 3 is that it does its own self-calibration and verification during and after manufacturing. So during production, it uses a complete internal digital calibration, self-test, and diagnostics to verify its own assembly. Most other controllers require manual calibration. So with the ProStar Gen 3, there's no bed of nails type testing that you might be familiar with that you see in printed circuit board verification and testing processes. Self-verification by the ProStar Gen 3 provides better quality control and it results in less undetected defects. Additionally, the ProStar Gen3 performs its self-diagnostics in real time when it's being installed and also during operation. So if you're an installer, the LED lights will indicate errors that the controller detects with the installation, such as compromised controller components, battery reverse polarity, or current, voltage, and temperature ranges that have been exceeded. The LED indications are more informative now, and the fault indications and other diagnostics information with the built-in meter and MS view is much more detailed than it was before with the metered version of the ProStar Gen2. We're going to take a look at some of the certifications. The ProStar Gen3, like the Gen2, has the CE certification, and it's manufactured in an ISO 9001 facility. And unlike the ProStar Gen2, the Gen3 is compliant with US FCC Class B Part 15, and it's certified to meet IEC 62109 standards. The IEC 62109 standard defines requirements for the design and manufacture of power equipment for protection against electric shock, fire, mechanical hazards, and impacts to the environment. More regions and customers are expecting conformity to this standard when choosing charge controllers. I just wanted to quickly compare and contrast the Gen2 and Gen3 meters. The Gen2 displays digital values only, whereas the Gen3 displays graphical information as well as digital. The Gen3 meter is 5 by 3 centimeters, so it's almost twice as large as the Gen2 meter. It has a backlight, so you can read it very easily. And the biggest difference is that it's interactive, so you can press buttons to adjust charging, LVD, lighting, and other settings. And you can use the meter to view log data over many days and months. So with that said, I'm going to give a quick demo so you can see how easy it is to navigate the meter with the scroll buttons. So let me just pull up the overhead camera. And hopefully you can all see this right about now. It looks like it's coming in pretty clearly. So this is the main menu that you're looking at here. And what I'm going to do is make some changes to the settings here. So I make some changes to the custom settings. I'm just going to go to custom, and I'm going to select it. And make a change to the charging. Make a change to the absorption voltage. So right now it's at 14. To change this, I'm going to simply hold this key down until the edit moves to the middle, right there. If I wanted to change this up or down, I just do so. And I'm going to actually just save it at the 14.0 here. So we go ahead and save that. And I'm going to confirm that, correct. And then I could do the same thing with the float voltage, same thing with equalization. The absorption timer, equalization timer, and then the equalization schedule if I wanted to schedule out 28 days or so. And move back. If I want to do the load control, I simply select load control. I'm going to do normal instead of lighting, so normal is your LVD. And if I select that and I want to change this, I'm just going to hold this. So I get the opportunity to edit. I can change it, or I can just save it back and hit save. And I confirm, and then all I have to do at this point is go back to the main menu, and I want to save this to the controller. So I'm going to reset it. Confirm that, and then this should go back to the very beginning, and those changes are saved now with the controller. So that's just a quick demo, and we do supply a meter map if you need it, but our meter navigation is pretty straightforward and intuitive, so there's a good chance that you can just play around with the meter a little bit and figure everything out on your own. But we do have a meter map if you need it, just in case. So we're going to take a look at some of the Gen 3 accessories. And I apologize because I have to get back to the PowerPoint deck. So hopefully we're back now. You should be seeing at any second the ProStar Gen 3 accessories. So we have the remote meter for log data alarms and errors, the Ethernet MeterBus converter, which allows you to connect the ProStar Gen 3 to an IP-based network and the internet. There are 2 data interface adapters on the upper right that help connect the controller with a computer or other device depending on the type of connection you need. The relay driver, this is if you want to set up alarms controlling external equipment. The meter hub, which allows multiple Morningstar products to communicate over a MeterBus network. And then lastly, you see the ground fault protection device and the remote temperature sensor. Here are some applications that are much better served by the ProStar Gen 3 versus the Gen 2. So first, you would have lighting applications. Second, systems with lithium batteries. And this is because the Gen 3 has a temperature fallback feature that allows you to set a low temperature threshold for battery charging. So battery charging will decrease and ultimately cease when you reach 0 degrees Celsius, for example. Also, the Gen 3 is terrific for hard-to-access battery compartments on boats and RVs, where you need a remote meter. These are good applications for the ProStar Gen 3. And also any systems that require remote monitoring of system metrics, such as surveillance systems. So to sum things up, the ProStar Gen 3 has the same footprint as the ProStar Gen 2. And unlike the Gen 2, the new Gen 3 can be used to adjust custom charging, load control, and lighting control settings. The meter interface is larger and interactive, and this controller can log up to 256 days of solar charge and load consumption data, and it complies with IEC 62109. It looks like we've reached the Q&A portion of this webinar, and I'm going to ask Doug to go ahead and go off mute. Doug, if you can hear me, I'm going to open up the questions and see what people have posed for us.
Okay. I just want to mention we got a question regarding someone requested that we show both the features that are remaining the same as well as new features. I believe we had detailed slides about that, and
bring that up.
There's a lot of things that stay the same, and there are new features. The dip switches are some of the you have more settings, custom settings. The meter is more interactive. You can set up custom settings on the meter even, and so it's a like.
So I'm bringing up the slides. So here are the similarities, and if you need this, you want to just give us a holler. We can send you a copy of the slide deck so you can see this. So here's the similarities. Again, 12 volt and 24 volt battery systems. There are metered and non-metered versions, and metered versions for 15 amps and 30 amps. Your max VOC is still 60 volts. What else is real important here? A warranty, of course, is 5 years. And let me just go for the differences again. Just quickly kind of show these. Again, I think the best way to do this is I can give you a copy of the PDF file of this PowerPoint deck, and then you can see that.
Yeah.
I'll show this one here.
One of the things I like is that you don't, like we had for the RTS and the remote temperature sensor, you had to take the cover off and then you had to solder it. So this is just we got terminals for that. That makes it very easy. And then the other thing is also when you take the cover off for slow switching mode, telecom mode, then we have a dip switch setting for that now. So that's a lot easier to do.
Okay, I'm gonna pick off some of these quick questions. So as I'm looking through here, Doug, yes, we mentioned that the Gen 3 will work with lithium-ion batteries. Actually, anything you want to add to that, Doug?
Sure. So it's possible, since we have custom settings with this now, you would be able to adjust them so they would be suitable for pretty much any type of battery. You can disable, for example, for lithium, you could disable the temperature compensation completely. And then also there's the low temperature fallback. I don't know if you mentioned that. That would be where it decreases charging below a certain temperature and actually shuts it off. We have two temperature settings. One, it starts to decrease, and then the complete shut off. So that allows it to continue operating at low temperatures and even with some recovery in there. So you're not completely shut off, but shut off enough to not damage the batteries based on some lithium battery manufacturers provide that information what the maximum charge current in cold temperatures is. So you can adjust those settings based on the maximum charge at low temperatures for different types of batteries. But we have on our resources tab, you'll see a best practices by battery chemistry. There's a lot of settings that are very important to get right with lithium, and it's easy to you know, kind of mess it up or have problems and issues, especially in cold temperatures. Low voltage disconnect, you might not be able to handle very large loads still. So there's a lot of considerations that you really need to know about with lithium batteries. And so we will be releasing, as we work with more lithium battery companies, we'll be releasing custom settings information on our website when that's available. We should have some coming out soon.
Okay, I'm going to pick off a couple of other questions here. So yes, somebody asked about receiving high-resolution images for their catalogs and websites. So yes, we can supply them to you. Let's see.
I thought the first question was really good about anti-hacking software.
Security anti-hacking software is included to prevent unauthorized remote access. So yeah, you want to go ahead and cover that?
Sure. So with the live view and MS view, remote connections require port forwarding, which isn't the most secure thing, but with certain routers, you might have certain security settings, so you can only access the port forwarding from certain IP addresses. There might also be third-party Ethernet to serial solutions that are secure. Our EMC1 adapter that Mark mentioned, that's available today, and at this point we only have live view and MS view. So it does have a setting though for disabling any write commands. So that means that it's out in the field. People might be able to access it if they somehow get your IP address, but they would not be able to change any of the settings if they were able to hack into it because it's disabled from remote control. And otherwise, our new cloud service, which will be available this year, I'm not sure exactly how soon. We hope it's going to be soon, but it will not require any port forwarding, and the setup. So there's no port forwarding setup, so that makes it more secure, and it will only be accessed with a password login over the internet.
Okay, terrific. Thanks for that question, and thanks for the answer. I see a question here about the operating temperature ranges. So the ranges are from -40 Celsius to positive 60 Celsius, and that's negative 40 Fahrenheit. I'm pretty good at that conversion. The other one is actually positive 140 Fahrenheit is the high end of that. Okay, so those are the temperature ranges. Let's see. Question here from Mark says, is the meter display standard?
No, that's the meter display is an option. So we just like with the ProStar, we had the non-meter and meter versions. We have the same non-meter and meter versions. Of course, it's only 12 and 24, and we no longer have the 48-volt option or the positive grounded versions of the ProStar. So the meter options is an optional thing, but the nice thing about it now is even if you don't get the meter option, you're able to buy a RM1 remote meter. That's a Morningstar remote meter that we have on our accessories page that you can plug in to, and so you might be able to, now you can use it as you would with the SunSaver Duo, if you're familiar with that, or the SunSaver MPDT. This is really nice for like marine systems or RVs where you want to have the controller near the battery, and you wouldn't have access to the controller necessarily, so you would be able to set it up at least visually, and so you'd be able to set it up so you'd be able to look at the remote meter, set up the remote meter, and monitor the system that way.
Okay, I have a question here from Matt. Is it possible to monitor and or change the settings on the Gen 3 model remotely? So you can't do this on the Gen 2, but why don't you tell us a little bit about how you can do this with the Gen 3?
So it was about monitoring the controller remotely?
Right, monitoring and or changing the settings on the Gen 3 remotely.
Okay. So with the port forwarding, you can connect with MSView with the EMC1, and you can also get Live View. So Live View gives you a web page access. You may be familiar with it with the Tristar MPPT. That's been available for a long time now. With the EMC1, we basically make that page and that same kind of live view interface with daily log values and the real-time data available on a web browser page that you can remotely access. Of course, our cloud service will initially have remote monitoring too. We will plan to set up some control capabilities into the cloud service, but that may be a while before that's available. Other than that, then with the MSView, you get all the capabilities of MSView. You could set that up remotely and be able to connect and control, reprogram. At this point, we do not have any firmware updates remotely, but we plan to add that to the EMC1 with a firmware update to the EMC1. I know you can update the firmware for the EMC1 remotely, and we plan to have a bootloader so you can set it up so you can remotely update the firmware with the other products as well. But that's still in development.
Okay, great. I have a question here from Matt. It says, let's see, what is the downside to using the telecom mode?
Well, that basically disables the higher frequency PWM switching. So while you lose that noise, the noise is actually a good thing. Is that it's pulsing using that pulse width modulation to have high frequency pulsing. It does a better job at regulating the voltage. So it goes to slow switching, 1 second pulses instead of like much high frequency that would cause noise. So in theory, it doesn't do as good of a job to do on-off switching, and it's so the pulsing is you lose that PWM feature to a great extent.
Okay, is the Gen 3 protected from lightning?
It has built-in surge protection, and that is that information I think is 1,500 watts per port. So that's built in. That's same with many of our other products. So it does have some degree. It's very fast. It's very if you don't blow it, I mean it's easy to get surges. I mean it's not going to prevent the largest surges that you can receive at a site. And if you're concerned about very large surges that could damage our transorbs, then you would want to get possibly consider external transient voltage protection, and that can be bought from many different electrical and solar suppliers.
Okay, thanks for that question and answer. And we have one coming in from Robert. Question is the Gen 3 waterproof, or does it need to be mounted in a weather-tight box or panel?
Yes, the new Gen 3 is indoor rated, so you would not want to have it outdoors where it would get get wet directly. It has high humidity, so the main thing is you could not get water in it. If water gets inside, of course, there's got all kinds of, it could potentially get in the meter, it could get on the board and really cause some damage. So you would not want to have it outdoors without any protection against the elements.
Okay, I have a question here that says the 2017 NEC changes drops the 48-volt limit for battery strings in residential occupancies. Are you considering higher voltage controllers as a result? And make sure.
Are you considering higher voltage? I was not aware of this. I'm not. We have controllers for 48 volts. It would be for the Tristar 45 PWM, and then our Tristar MPDT 30. Those would be your two options for 48 volts. We don't have plans to extend this to 48 volt for the ProStar series.
Right. Okay. So the ProStar Gen 3 is at 12 and 24, and then we have other PWM controllers as well as MPPT controllers that would handle 48 volt batteries. Okay.
And someone asked about what is PWM noise. Pulse width modulation, you might see it on some of our other, we have, if you go to our resources tab and go to the white papers and documents link there, we have a white paper actually about PWM, and we have several, one comparing MPPT to PWM and another one just talking about what PWM is. So that would be good resources. PWM pulses the battery. It's considered a very good way to regulate the voltage.
Okay, so that's if you go to morningstarcorp.com and you go to the resources tab, and underneath that tab, white papers, and I don't recall the exact title of that white paper. Do you have any idea what the title is of that, Doug, or we can just shoot them in an email?
Well, there's a couple pages. I mean, they all have PWM in the title. So
okay,
you'd see there's a limited number, but there's traditional PWM versus MPPT, and then there's the paper on actually the PWM paper, the basic information. I wanted to get this added. We hope to add that soon. But if you go to the support page then and you do a search for PWM, You should be able to find it there with the PWM. You just do PWM in the support library, and there's paper which is called several things will come up. One is
why don't we just
the YPWM, and then that would be the way to find it.
Okay. And like I said, I'll make a note to send them the link to the right paper.
Okay.
Paper.
Yeah, we'll make sure that's available.
Alrighty. Let's see. What we got here?
There's a question about 300 volt charging. We don't have anything to charge 300 volt batteries. We can charge from 300 volts to a 48 volt or 24 volt with the 600 volt MPDT controller, but we don't have anything for 300 volt batteries. And then there's a question about the price difference. You want to handle that one, Mark?
Yeah, for pricing, there's a couple questions came in about pricing and availability of products. We're a manufacturer and we deal through a distribution network. So to get pricing information, we request that you contact a Morningstar distributor. And if you don't know or have a Morningstar distributor yet, you can just contact us and we will find a distributor in your area that can best serve you as far as those questions about pricing and availability.
And I guess the last question is about lighting. We have a white paper about the Sunsaver MPDT lighting control, and that gives you full details about it's the same as for the ProStar Gen2 or Gen3. So we can, if you go to the Sunsaver MPDT page, you can see full details about how to set up lighting control with the ProStar. And then the meter map has information about lighting control setup. So you're just basically making on-off timing based on time of day related to before or after dawn, dusk, solar midnight, and solar noon. So if that helps. Otherwise, I would look at the white paper on the Sunsaver MPDT because that's going to be the same information.
Okay, very good. A question here from a sim. Question is, what is LV Besetting for 50% DOD in battery? Can it be changed?
This will depend on your system and what kind of loads you have, but generally it's anywhere from 12 to 12.2 volts maybe. It will depend on the size of the load. We do have, though, as Mark mentioned, that it does have current compensation for voltage, so current may not affect it as much because the current loads can, with big currents, make the voltage dip. So you'd have to determine that with the battery that you have, where that might be best to get to 50% depth of discharge.
Okay, and I think the last question I see is this unit strictly for solar or can it be used with wind or hydro?
Yes, we did not make this controller compatible with wind. If you need a PWM controller for wind, we have the Tristar PWM or Tristar PWM controller can be used in diversion charge control, so that is dedicated for that application.
Okay, very good. I think we've covered all the questions that I can see, Doug. Did I miss anything, or does it look like we covered them all?
No, I think we got them all. There's a lot there. We got them, I think.
Yeah,
thanks everybody for the questions and joining our webinar.
Yeah, lots of good participation. So I'm just going to go to the thank you slide here, if I can forward this here and find the thank you slide. Bring that up, depending on what part of the world you are at as you're looking at this. I also have the contact information. You can just go to morningstarcorp.com and contact us if you have any additional questions or if you want to take something offline. I'm going to leave this up for a couple more seconds, and other than that, I'd like to just thank everyone for joining. We'll see you next time, and this concludes the broadcast. Thanks so much.